day I got a job offer, Cindy, my cousin's wife, announced she was pregnant. She gave me two options, move out or pay $10,000 a month for living expenses. But what she didn't know is that the house we're living in now is mine, and the money we use also comes from me. The day I received my offer letter, Uncle Mark made a huge feast. Even Jason, my cousin, who was usually too busy with work, rushed home before dinner. After a few rounds of drinks, Cindy, who had been quietly eating, suddenly spoke. I'm pregnant. The room went silent for a few seconds before it burst into laughter and excitement. Jason's face turned red with joy as he stared at Cindy's belly. Really? Cindy, why didn't you tell me? Cindy smiled shyly. I wanted to surprise you. No one was happier than Uncle Mark and Aunt Linda. Jason and Cindy had been married for 3 years without having any children. I was genuinely happy for Cindy and thought to myself, I'll definitely give my future niece or nephew a big gift. Cindy suddenly put down her chopsticks. There's one more thing I want to mention, she said. Aunt Linda, what is it? I think Sierra should move out, Cindy said with a cold expression. She's already found a job, and now that I'm pregnant, it's going to be inconvenient after the baby is born. The room instantly became silent, and Uncle Mark and Aunt Linda's faces grew awkward. Cindy, though usually quiet, had never spoken to me with such a cold tone. I had always thought she was nice, so I responded kindly, there shouldn't be any inconvenience. And when the baby arrives, I can even help take care of it. When the baby comes, there won't be enough room for everyone. How could that be? I said, trying to be considerate. We can clean up the attic floor and make room for your little family. There will be more than enough space. Cindy shot me an inexplicable glare. Aunt Linda chimed in to reassure her, Cindy, don't worry, we'll make sure neither you nor the baby is uncomfortable. Cindy wasn't finished. When I have the baby, I'll be recovering and won't be able to move around or dress properly. It's just not right to have an outsider in the house. Suddenly, her expression softened again. Sierra, I'm not trying to force you out, but you've been living here for so many years. Isn't it time you moved on? Seeing my face darken, Cindy added, your parents passed away early. When you were in college and grad school, my in-laws covered all your living expenses. Nowadays, young women are all about independence. It's time you learned some self-respect and started living on your own. Uncle Mark, who had been silent for a long time, finally slammed his hand on the table, yelling at Cindy, that's enough. You're getting out of line. Jason, take your wife back to your room. Jason quickly stepped in to defend her. Dad, Cindy's pregnant. Why are you yelling at her? Besides, she's not wrong. Uncle Mark lost it. He slammed his glass down and shouted at Jason, then you can get out too, Cindy wasn't wrong. 7 years ago, my parents were in a car accident and both became comatose. That year, I was about to take my college entrance exams, juggling between school and the hospital. And I started thinking about hiring a nurse. When Uncle Mark found out, he came to me and said, Sierra, you don't need to hire a nurse. Aunt Linda and I can take care of them. Uncle Mark had always been kind to me, but taking care of one person in a coma was already hard, let alone two. It's no trouble, he said, tears welling in his eyes. They're my sister and brother-in-law, after all. No one will care for them better than family. After thinking it over, I agreed and paid Uncle Mark and Aunt Linda triple the normal rate to take care of my parents. They did a great job. Every time I visited, there was no smell or mess on them. They looked after my parents for over a year before both passed away.
I went to college in another city. Some people suggested I sell the estate house, but I couldn't. This house had been my parents' marital home, and every tree and room was designed by my mother. I wanted someone to take care of the house while I was away. When Uncle Mark heard this, he volunteered, and so they moved in and stayed for years. When I started grad school, Uncle Mark and Aunt Linda urged me to move back home, saying they could help look after me. After today's confrontation with Cindy, I finally understood why she had been distant with me all along. After Jason and Cindy left, I asked Uncle Mark, does Cindy not know about the house? Aunt Linda smiled nervously. That's my fault. I told Cindy and her family that the house was ours. Jason's family insisted they wouldn't marry him off unless he had a house. But we don't have money, so we had to say the house was ours. I could understand that. Uncle Mark had never been responsible. My parents had arranged several jobs for him, but he never stuck with any of them, always relying on my family's support to start his own. But in recent years, Uncle Mark and Aunt Linda had been good to me. I gently said, you can only hide the truth for so long. It's better to explain this to Cindy sooner rather than later. If she really needs a house, I have another one I could let them live in. Uncle Mark replied, Sierra, you've done more than enough for us. Don't worry. I would never take advantage of you. For the next few days, I saw Cindy around the house. She was either giving me cold looks or making passive-aggressive comments while watching TV. Some people really have no shame, living in someone else's house like it's their own. You can't even kick them out, she would say, clearly directed at me. Certain people think they're some kind of pampered princess. Like everyone adores them. But honestly, people can't stand her. I kept quiet, hoping Uncle Mark and Aunt Linda would handle it. I had just started my new job and was swamped with work. I often stayed late at the office, only returning home long after everyone had gone to bed. One night I came home earlier than usual, but it was already dark. The house was silent as everyone had gone to sleep. I quietly made my way upstairs, wanting nothing more than to collapse on my bed. But the moment I lay down, I heard a sharp scream. Ouch! I jumped up as the room lights flicked on. There, lying in my bed, was Cindy, dressed in her nightgown and staring at me in shock. Uncle Mark and Aunt Linda rushed in. What happened? Uncle Mark asked. I tried to stay calm. Cindy, why are you in my bed? Cindy's face turned cold. This is my house. I can sleep wherever I want. I frowned, irritated. Aunt Linda quickly pulled me out of the room, trying to smooth things over. Sierra, I forgot to tell you, Cindy moved into your room. When? I asked. This afternoon. She said she wanted to enjoy the sunlight through the large window. My room, which my mother had designed especially for me, had a huge floor-to-ceiling window. When the sun rose, the room would be filled with light. In winter, it was the warmest, coziest spot in the house. I was upset they had moved her into my room without even asking me. Aunt Linda noticed my displeasure and softened her tone even further. Sierra, I'm sorry we didn't ask for your permission, but Cindy's pregnant and her morning sickness is really bad. She said the sunlight makes her feel better. Uncle Mark came out looking frustrated. What is going on here? Everyone gets pregnant, but no one behaves like this. She can't just take over your room. Cindy needs to move out of there, I quickly said. It's fine, Uncle Mark. Uncle Mark had always been protective of me. No matter what happened, I didn't want to cause tension between him and Aunt Linda. So I said, really, it's okay. I'll just sleep in another room. Cindy's pregnant, and she needs the space more. Uncle Mark hesitated, looking conflicted. But this is unfair to you. I smiled. We're family. It's not a big deal. Besides, where did you move my things? Aunt Linda replied. We put everything in the room on the far west side. The west room was the smallest in the house. It didn't get much sunlight and had just one small window. It was originally meant for the housekeeper. Moving from the best room to the worst one didn't sit well with me, but seeing Uncle Mark's struggled expression made me let it go. I signed my first big contract at work and stopped by the house to grab some documents. I thought to ask Linda to celebrate with me over dinner. As I approached the door, I overheard, "What are we going to do?" "If we don't get Sierra out of the house, she'll never let us see our grandson. We just need to wait," Mark replied. Wait for what? Cindy hasn't even let Jason sleep in the bed these last few days. Aunt Linda sounded panicked. And what about the medicine? We've been giving it to Sierra for over 3 years, and she's still perfectly healthy. When is she going to die? What medicine? Linda wanted me dead. It made sense. My health had deteriorated. I'd been suffering from nosebleeds and losing hair. How can you not see it working? Mark said, "How do you think her parents offed?" We drugged them. Linda sighed. Should we increase the dosage? That might work. Her parents lasted a year. It's been 3 years for Sierra, so no one will suspect anything. We've dragged this out. And now she's almost spent all her parents' inheritance. What are you worried about? Linda asked. It's all going to be ours eventually. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind went blank. Mark's kindness had all been an act. They'd been poisoning me this entire time. I stumbled downstairs, passing through the living room where Cindy was watching TV. Sierra, she called out in an unusually friendly tone. Come. For a moment I was in shock, but I managed to respond. Need something, Cindy? I've been thinking, it's not right to kick you out now that you've just started working. Before I could figure out her intentions, she continued. We're family after all. Jason is supporting the entire household. Since you found a job, you should help out. I think it's only fair for you to start paying $10,000 a month in expenses. You'd have to pay even more elsewhere. That's her game. I smiled. That's perfectly fair, Cindy, but I guess you didn't know this estate is actually mine. Cindy was in disbelief. What are you talking about? Impossible. Not just the house, but all the expenses around here. Food, utilities, everything have been paid by me. Before I moved back in, Uncle Mark had been taking care of the estate and would request maintenance money every month. It was always something. The lawnmower had broken or the walls needed repainting. As a student, I didn't know much about these things, so I gave him whatever he asked for. Since I returned, I've taken on all the household expenses. Thinking back, I realized I needed to check the finances more closely. You're lying, Cindy exclaimed. Uncle Mark and Aunt Linda entered the room. Why are you home so early? Aunt Linda looked surprised. Before I could answer, Cindy begged her mom for answers. Mom, is it true? This doormat is the owner? Both their faces darkened, and Aunt Linda tried to cover it up. No, darling, she's joking. I immediately tossed the house deed from my bag onto the table. Cindy's face drained of color as she stared at the house deed on the table. Uncle Mark and Aunt Linda looked like they had seen a ghost. You're lying. Cindy stammered, her voice trembling. This can't be true. You don't own this house? I smirked, my eyes cold. Read it, Cindy. It's mine, and it's been mine all along. Aunt Linda snatched the paper, her hands shaking as she read it over. Her face paled as the truth sank in. It's true, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Cindy turned to Uncle Mark, panic setting in. You knew about this, didn't you? She hissed, her composure slipping. You've been playing me this whole time. Uncle Mark opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off, my voice ice cold. It's funny, Cindy, how you've been acting like the queen of this house, like you were untouchable. But guess what? You've been playing games on my turf. The room fell silent, a thick tension hanging in the air. I could see the fear in their eyes, but that didn't stop me. I had waited too long for this moment. And now, I continued, my voice laced with venom. You're all going to pay for what you've done. Uncle Mark stepped forward, trying to put on his usual fake charm. Sierra, sweetheart, let's talk about this. We can work something out. We're family, after all. I raised an eyebrow. Family? You don't get to play that card. Not after you tried to kill me. Not after you murdered my parents. Their eyes widened in horror, and Cindy's breath hitched. What are you talking about? She sputtered. That's insane. Is it? I asked, my voice deadly calm. I overheard everything. The medicine, the plan. You thought I wouldn't find out? Well, guess what? I did. And now it's my turn to play. A sinister smile crept onto my face as I pulled out my phone. I've been preparing for this day for weeks. I found every single skeleton in your closets. I made sure I knew everything. Before they could react, I tapped on the screen, and the entire house went pitch black. The power had been cut. Cindy screamed, and Uncle Mark cursed under his breath. I could feel their panic rising. I rigged the house, I said, my voice echoing in the darkness. Every light, every door, every camera. You're all locked in here with me now. No one's getting out until I say so. Cindy's voice quivered. What do you mean, locked in? You've been living in my house like it's yours, I said, my voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. Now you're trapped in it. I control everything. Uncle Mark's voice cracked. Sierra, this isn't funny. You can't just lock us in here. I chuckled darkly. Oh, Uncle Mark, you still don't get it, do you? I'm done being the doormat. I've been planning this for months. I flicked on the emergency lights, casting an eerie red glow throughout the house. The entire place felt like a prison now, and they were the prisoners. And now, I said, you're going to feel what it's like to be powerless. You're going to suffer the way I did. Uncle Mark tried to rush toward the door, but it was no use. The electronic lock system I had installed had sealed it tight. Cindy frantically tugged on the handle, but nothing budged. You're crazy, Cindy screamed in tears. I crossed my arms, unmoved. No, Cindy, you're the one who's crazy for thinking you could get away with poisoning me for years. I walked slowly toward them, savoring the fear in their eyes. Remember that medicine you've been slipping into my food? I found out months ago. And guess what? I switched it out. Aunt Linda's voice trembled. What did you do? Oh, nothing much, I said casually. Just gave you a taste of your own poison. Only unlike the slow-acting crap you've been feeding me, the stuff I used is a little faster. Their faces went as white. Uncle Mark's hands shook uncontrollably. What do you mean? He stammered. I smiled darkly. The drinks I served you at dinner last night? You're already feeling it, aren't you? The dizziness? The nausea? Uncle Mark's knees buckled as he collapsed to the floor. His breathing labored. Cindy grabbed her throat, her eyes wide in terror. No, you're lying. Am I? I whispered, my voice like a knife. You should have paid more attention to what I was doing. You didn't think I'd learn from you? That I'd figure out your tricks? Aunt Linda started to cry. Sierra, please. Please don't do this. We're sorry. I knelt down beside her, my smile disappearing. You're sorry? You murdered my parents. You tried to murder me. Sorry doesn't cut it. I stood back up, walking toward the kitchen. You have a choice now, I said, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. There's an antidote. But here's the thing, it's only enough for one of you. Their eyes widened in disbelief as I placed the bottle on the table. Good luck, I said, heading for the door. Let's see who makes it out of here alive. I walked out, heard them scrambling behind me, fighting over the antidote, their voices desperate and panicked. I didn't turn around. I had done what I needed to do. But I wasn't finished just yet. I stepped outside and pulled out my phone once again. Tapping on a different app, I activated the final part of my plan. Inside the house, the gas lines I had rigged began to leak, filling the rooms with an invisible danger. In less than an hour, the house would be completely toxic. I smiled to myself as I got into my car, driving away as the house, a house full of lies and betrayal, became a ticking time bomb. The moment I left the driveway, I sent a final text to an anonymous number I had saved in my phone. It's done. The house is yours. Make sure it disappears. No one would ever find their bodies. No one would ever suspect a thing. After all, who would question the tragic gas leak that wiped out an entire family? I wasn't just free, I was unstoppable.
Reported it as a tragic gas leak. An explosion so powerful it left little of the house standing. And even less of Uncle Mark, Aunt Linda, or Cindy. The neighborhood gathered. whispering rumors about faulty appliances. A freak accident, bad luck. But I knew the truth. Jason didn't return immediately after the explosion. It wasn't until 2 days later, once the house had been reduced to little more than ash and caution tape, that he finally came back. He looked lost, as if he expected someone to welcome him home with open arms, as if he hadn't just lost everything. Jason wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, so I knew it wouldn't take long for him to find out the truth. Once I was ready, I showed up at his cheap motel room, my face calm, masking the storm brewing underneath. He opened the door, eyes bloodshot from crying or drinking, probably both. "Sierra?" he croaked. "What the hell are you doing here?" I smiled softly. "I wanted to check in on you. After all, we're all that's left." His confusion deepened. What? Cindy's gone. Your parents are gone. The house is gone. And now, Jason, there's just you and me. Jason ran his hand through his hair, already frazzled. "How could this happen?" His voice cracked, and he sank down onto the bed, shaking his head. "What am I supposed to do now?" I tilted my head, watching him carefully. "You really don't get it, do you?" He looked up at me, clearly not following. "What are you talking about?" I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "They were trying to kill me, Jason, your entire family. Uncle Mark and Aunt Linda poisoned my parents, and they were doing the same to me. Cindy was in on it too. They wanted everything." His face paled as he shook his head in disbelief. That's insane. You're making it up." "Oh, am I?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the audio files. I had recorded the entire conversation between Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark, the one about poisoning me, about killing my parents, about how they wanted me dead. I played it for him, watching his expression as the truth hit him like a freight train. "No," Jason whispered, shaking his head. "They wouldn't." "They did," I cut him off. "And you? You let it happen? Maybe you didn't know all the details, but you let them manipulate me. Take over my home, bleed me dry, and now you're going to pay for it." Jason's face twisted with fear and confusion. "What do you mean? What do you want from me?" "I don't have anything left. Cindy was the one handling all the money." I smiled coldly. "That's where you're wrong. Jason, you see, Cindy was smart, but not as smart as me. She kept her hands on your finances, sure, but I know exactly what you've been up to." Jason blinked, looking utterly lost. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, come on, Jason," I said, circling him slowly. "Do you really think Cindy kept all your secrets? She wasn't that loyal. I know all about the dirty deals you've made. The fraud, the money laundering, the embezzlement, and now it's all going to fall back on you." Jason's face paled. No, that's not true. You don't have proof." I raised an eyebrow and pulled out a stack of documents from my bag, tossing them onto the bed beside him. They detailed every shady business deal, every illegal transaction, every lie he'd built his career on. "Let's just say Cindy wasn't as careful as she thought," I said, smirking. "I have everything I need to destroy you. Jason, all it takes is one phone call, and you'll be rotting in prison for the rest of your life." Jason stared at the papers in disbelief, his hands trembling as he reached for them. "But why? Why are you doing this?" I leaned in close, my voice barely a whisper. "Because I want you to feel what I felt. The betrayal, the helplessness, the knowledge that your life is crumbling around you, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Jason shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "Please, Sierra. I didn't know. I didn't want this." "You didn't want this?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "Well, tough, because now you're going to live with it." I turned to leave, but before I walked out the door, I looked back at him one last time. "Oh, and Jason?" I transferred the rest of the inheritance to a separate account. "It's mine now. Everything. You'll be lucky if you can afford a sandwich tomorrow." I slammed the door behind me, leaving Jason to wallow in his misery. By the time anyone figured out what had really happened, Jason would be bankrupt, penniless, and alone. He'd have nothing and no one, just like I had. Only, unlike him, I survived, and I came out on top.